Hey guys, what's up? Benny Broseph here. And if you haven't been paying attention to my channel, I recently released an update for my controller support program. And one of the big things that I did was I added official support for Path of Exile. But, of course, I added a bunch of new things as well. Pretty much recoded the whole thing from scratch, so I've been kind of busy, right? So what I wanted to do with this video was kind of go in depth with all the settings, new and old, and explain how everything works so that you can set it up exactly how you want it for your applications. So if you are already familiar with the program, you'll probably want to go watch the quick start guide that I made instead, and that'll just get you up and running quickly. Try out the program for yourself and then come back to this video if you still have questions or need help setting something up. So with that in mind, let's kind of jump into it here. So first thing that we want to do obviously is download the program. As of right now, the most recent version is version 4.0, but that could change. So whenever you're watching this video, just look for the most recent version here, and then you're going to want to click Assets and then download the version number zip right here. I'm going to leave a link to this page in the description, and it will always have the most recent version because this is where I'm going to post all of my updates. So some other kind of helpful things here: if you go to the code tab, you can see the README for the project, and that shows a overlay of what the defaults are for both Path of Exile and for Diablo. So you may want to check that out, may be helpful. But what I want to do first, minimize that, and we're going to go ahead and open up the program. So once you have it downloaded, what you want to do is extract it somewhere. I have it extracted to my documents folder, since that's a pretty easy place to remember where to go for it. And once you extract it, you'll have something that looks similar to this right here. And what I want to launch from this point is the configuration form.exe. I already have all my settings set. That's fine. What I want to do first is actually explain what the program does, and then I'll come back to the settings. So I'm going to hit launch here, and then I'm going to go into Diablo. We'll wait for that to load. So if you ever launch the program before you launch Diablo, what you'll want to do first is hit F5. That refreshes the whole script, starts it over from the beginning. So as you can see, let me actually turn on my controller overlay so that you can see what I'm pressing as well. So the first thing that you notice obviously is this battery over here, and then all these little icons. This is a new feature that I added, which is basically just a button overlay. This controller over here is not part of it. That's part of my recording stuff, so don't worry about that. But these icons here that my mouse is on top of, that is part of the program, and these adapt to whatever you set your key bindings to. So by default, it's going to look something similar like to this. But if you change these in the settings that I'm going to go over later, it updates based on that. So this is not static. You can change the positions of these icons as well. So that's a big new feature, is this image overlay, just to kind of help you see what buttons are going to do what based on your configuration. So let's actually get into game. And the very first thing that I want to mention is how to move, right? It's very easy. All you do is you just move the left stick in whatever direction you're trying to get to. It moves the mouse in a little oval there at like a max range, and it always brings the mouse back to the center of the screen whenever you let go. And the right stick is in control of a little reticule right here. I call it the targeting reticule, and So in conjunction with each other here, the left stick moves, the right stick has this little targeting reticule. The reason why is because you can force buttons to move the mouse very quickly to that targeting reticule and then fire off that key binding. So right now you can see that I'm pressing the left trigger, and I've bound the left trigger to my bola skill at the bottom here, you can see. So whenever I fire off the left trigger, it will quickly move the mouse to the targeting reticule's location and fire off the skill. And if you press and hold it, that's fine. It will continuously hold the left mouse button for you. So that's what these two sticks do. That's what the left trigger does. Right trigger I have set to just do my right mouse button skill. Very simple. But then we get to my next skills, and if you look in the image overlay, you can see that there is like a filled white left bumper and then a non-filled left bumper. So filled means press and hold. So if I press and hold left bumper, that's going to use my, I think it's smoke screen. Yeah. And if I just press it, it's going to use companion. So that's what that's the color code, so to speak, for the image overlay. So that's what left bumper does. Right bumper, you can obviously see if I press it, that's going to do vault, and then right bumper is vengeance if I press and hold. However, when I vault, I don't vault in the targeting reticule location because vault is more of a movement type of ability. So if I'm firing off skills in a direction, I don't want to vault where I'm aiming this targeting reticule. I want to vault somewhere else. Most likely where I'm currently aiming the mouse with my left stick. So I have a setting that does that, and I've already bound it, and I'll show you how to do the same. But what it does is, whenever I press vault, it instead vaults in the direction of my left stick, so that I can fire off skills and vault in completely different directions without having to, do any kind of crazy movement with my thumbs here. So those are all of the skills. If we now take a look at the face buttons, the A, X, Y, and B buttons, X button is gonna drink a potion. I'm already at full life, so I can't use it. The A button is used for just standard left clicking with no shift. B button closes all windows, and then the Y button is a little special. So the Y button, when it's pressed, presses Alt, and then when it's held, it activates a special mode called Loot. And to demonstrate that, I'm actually going to use my mouse and keyboard real quick. Basically what it does is it spams the left click underneath your feet so that you can easily pick up items that are on the ground. So as a demonstration, I'm going to press and hold Y, and I just walk over all these items and I pick them up. So that's what that particular key binding is for. Then we have the sticks. The left stick is going to activate cursor mode, and what that does is it allows me to move the mouse freely around the screen rather than in that oval. It's useful for clicking things that are kind of out of the way. Like if I wanted to actually go into the keep depths level 1, it'd be very difficult for me to try to do it this way, but it's very easy once I'm in cursor mode. And similarly, the right stick, if I press that down, I go into free target mode, which is the exact same thing, except now it's for the targeting reticule. And you can activate both of these modes at the same time if you want, and it doesn't affect whether they work or not. I'm still, firing off skills at wherever the targeting reticule is supposed to be, but it's not super practical for movement because now you're going to have to move around and press A button to move, but the option is there. And it's also helpful if you need to very quickly use your mouse to do something, you can just kind of disable the little oval shape constraint, so you can use your mouse real quick if you need to manually. Alright, so now for the start and back button. Start button obviously pauses. It's going to open up the escape menu or the game menu. But our back button, when you press it, is going to do two things at the same time. It's going to activate a mode called inventory mode, and it's going to press whatever your bound key for inventory is, or whatever you've set it to press. By default, it'll open up the inventory, which is tab in Diablo. So while in inventory mode, instead of the D-pad doing the normal bound keys, now the D-pad is going to control the mouse in a grid-like fashion. So if I move my D-pad around like this, you can see the mouse is moving around in a grid, and it does wrap around to the sides. And now, recently, or not recently, but it's a new feature to this particular version. You can press and hold to move a little bit faster as well. And it obviously also works on the actual equipment as well. It's not limited to the actual grid here. So that is that. But you can also still move while you're doing it. So if I'm trying to get to a specific item, but I know that it's kind of far away, and enemies are attacking me at the same time, you know, I'm trying to equip something in combat, you can still move while doing it, and you can still fire off skills if you need to. But obviously, if you try to fire off skills over the inventory window, you know, you're gonna have some problems there. But yeah, this makes it super easy to kind of like equip things that you need to. Obviously, I don't want to actually do that, right? That would be a tragedy. And then just press back button again. That will disable inventory mode and close the inventory out for you. So the final buttons that I haven't talked about, I'm going to go over the D-pad first. And that one's pretty simple. Down is going to try to use Town Portal, and you can see that in the image overlay at the bottom. We have left, which is going to open the follower menu. Up opens up skills, and then you can use cursor mode to kind of set those pretty easily. The right D-pad, whenever it's pressed, brings up the map overlay, and then whenever you press and hold it, it activates cursor mode for you, and it brings up the world map. So you can very quickly pull this up, pick where you need to go, and then teleport in. And then the final button, and this is actually a button that was not actually available in the previous version. That is the guide button, or the little Xbox button at the top of your controller. That button, by default, will swap the left and right stick responsibilities. So right now, left stick is for movement, right stick is for targeting. But if I press guide, now my right stick is controlling movement, my left stick is controlling the targeting reticule. I can't play like this. I'm already kind of like discombobulated. I can't really quite control it. But the option is there for you if somehow it's useful, right? So I'll go ahead and swap that back. So we got regular movement now. So now that we've explained all of the buttons, I'm just going to kind of go into a combat situation just so you can kind of see what it looks like in action. These enemies are going to be too hard for me to kill because I'm pretty sure I have the torment level like way up when I shouldn't. But as far as like movement goes, I am extremely agile in comparison to when I'm playing on mouse and keyboard, just because I can vault in basically any direction that I need to. So even though I can't really kill these guys because I don't have like the damage, it's actually pretty hard for me to die just because I can kite them so well. And I'm not even using like any of my like movement skills or anything to try to stay alive, but probably should, right? Basically just vaulting and pressing the sticks, right? But that is what it would look like in combat. We'll turn on Vengeance just for fun. Vault back over here. Drink a potion. But yeah, as you can see, I cannot kill these enemies. I'm on way too high of a torment level for the gear that I'm wearing. I was trying out like a different build, I think, before I stopped playing a long time ago. But yeah, let's go ahead and get out of here. So we'll go ahead and town portal back. And then I am going to go ahead and show off the settings for everything. In order to do that, in order to exit out of the program, I already explained that F5 like restarts it. F10 will pause it. So now you can see pressing all these buttons, the program is now turned off, so it doesn't do anything. But if you want to completely exit, that's going to be F12, and that will close it out for you. Alright, so let's go ahead and exit Diablo here. I'm also going to hide the controller there because we don't need to look at that anymore. And we'll minimize this. And let's go to our configuration form. So there's a bunch of buttons here. There's 4 more buttons than there were last time. But it's largely, actually there's 5 buttons, but it's largely remained the same as it was previously. So on top we have our profile INI. This is where any game specific settings are going to be located. And then below that we have our Keybindings INI, and that's going to be specific to characters. Like if you're playing a demon hunter in Diablo or you're playing barbarian, you're going to set different key bindings for different character types. So let's go ahead and open up an INI here. We'll open up the Diablo one. So there's 4 different tabs. These are basically just the different categories for each of the settings. I've kind of split them up so it's a little bit easier to manage. But preferences are kind of like the odds and ends sort of settings that didn't really fit in any other larger category. So they're kind of loosely related in a lot of cases. Excuse me, but let's get started. So the application name is basically just what you're going to put for the actual name of the window that the game or application or whatever runs. So for instance, Diablo is obviously Diablo 3. Path of Exiles is Path of Exile. I'll show that real quick. I was working on one for League of Legends, which is still kind of incomplete. But that one is a little weird. It's League of Legends, parentheses TM, client. That's exactly what's listed in the taskbar as the name of the window. That's what you put here. And what this setting does is it just looks for a window with that name, and whenever the program starts, it automatically tabs into that window. So next we have the loot delay. So when I was going over the special like loot key binding setting, that this is essentially the frequency in which it spams that left click underneath your feet to pick up items. It's really useful to raise this value to higher milliseconds when you're playing games like Path of Exile. I've already done it in the default profile, so you're fine. But if in other games they have a similar thing where they check for frequency of button presses, and then they might like disconnect you based on that. You'll want to raise this value higher, because in Path of Exile they have like a little, it's not really anti-cheat, kind of is. If you have this value too low in Path of Exile, it'll disconnect you from the server and you have to reconnect. It's kind of a hassle. They don't ban you or anything, so you don't have to worry if it happens. You didn't get banned. You'll just have to set this value higher and then reconnect. Next we have the targeting delay. So this is the delay in between each targeting or targeted skill press. So whenever you press a skill, like you saw in the demonstration, it moves the mouse from wherever it is currently to the targeting reticule, then presses the key. So this delay is the time between moving the mouse and then pressing the key. So there's a little bit of buffer room so that the game has time to register that the mouse moved and then the button got pressed. In Path of Exile, I raised it to about 10 milliseconds, because lower than that, and it was having some situations where it wasn't quite registering that the mouse had moved yet. So if you're having some issues with, you're pressing a targeted skill and it's not going where you said, try raising this value. It is in milliseconds. All right, so next, this is not super relevant to any game really other than League of Legends, but if there's ever a situation where instead of pressing like for Diablo, the space key to move, you want it to spam press it over and over and over, you would set this to true. The reason why I have it is because in League of Legends, if you spam press the left click to move, pathing updates immediately, like every frame, instead of every like 30 frames or half a second, however long it is. It's really slow. Pathing updates really slow if you just press and hold, but if you spam click, it updates like instantly. So that's why this setting is here. Halt on movement. In games that have animation canceling, like Path of Exile and League of Legends both have animation canceling, you want to set this to false, so that whenever you press a targeted skill, it doesn't stop trying to move, and so that targeted skill takes precedence. Because if you set it to true, then you'll stop moving when you press the targeted skill, and you'll start moving again once you release it, and that can interrupt the skill in Path of Exile. So again, it's set by default, but I'm just trying to explain what it does. So Diablo, there's no animation canceling, so it's fine. We want to cancel movement whenever we're using targeted skills, because there's no animation canceling. You're locked in. Vibration strength. This is just kind of a personal preference thing. The maximum value that you can put is 65,000, and I've kind of put it at 5,500 or 55,000. I'm using an Xbox One wireless controller, the whatever version 2, the one that has Bluetooth enabled. That I'm using that version of the controllers, and this works really well for me. Personal preference. Try out different values. The hold delay, or I'm sorry, vibration duration first. This is just the time in milliseconds that the controller vibrates for. It's very self-explanatory. Up this if you want it to vibrate longer, or turn it down to 0 if you don't want it to vibrate at all. Don't set this to 0. Don't set the strength to 0, because it will still, quote unquote vibrate for the duration. It just won't actually turn the motors. It'd be much better for you to set this to 0. That way it won't even try to vibrate at all. Hold delay. So this is the amount of time between you pressing the button and then the script decides that you've held it down. So I've set it to 210. That means that from the moment that I press the button, if I hold it for 210 milliseconds or more, the script will consider me pressing the held key binding. So like on the left bumper and the right bumper, it goes from either skill 1 or 2 based on press or hold. It's that timing between either pressing skill 1 or pressing skill 2 is this duration. Then the rest of these are just the little tooltip notifications that you had seen previously. I'll launch the program just to show, like the pause one here. There's one for the different modes. These tooltips can all be disabled if you need to, or if you just don't want to see them. So that's what these are. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you want to disable those notifications. And then cursor mode at start, and then free target mode at start. This is basically if you're in a situation where you always want to be in cursor mode, or you always want to be in free target mode and you don't want to have to press a button to do so, you can just set them to, at the very start of the program, enable these modes if you need to. So that's what those particular settings are. And with that, that is the preferences menu completely done. So let's go to the next tab. So this is all the analog stick settings. So these are everything to do with the targeting reticule and the movement circle and all that kind of stuff. So this first value is what everything is scaled based on. You don't want to change this. I'll just say that very quickly. You do not want to change this unless you plan on editing every single one of these values yourself. This is the resolution that I wrote these values on. So if you have a larger monitor or a smaller monitor, it will scale to your monitor automatically. This is not what you input for your desktop resolution. I've already, inside of the script, I already know what your desktop resolution is, and or not the desktop, the window of Diablo that you're playing on, and I scale based on this base resolution. So do not change this unless you also plan on editing all of these values as well. So what are these other values? So the first one is the minimum radius for the left stick by default, or the movement stick. And the minimum radius is set to 5538, and the max radius is also set to 5538. The reason for this is I don't want the left stick to be like pressure sensitive. It always moves to the absolute maximum whenever it's in use at all, so that, you know, whenever you press in a direction, your character moves in that direction immediately, rather than, you know, because there's no gradual movement in any of these games, right? It's either you're moving or you're not moving. So the left stick reflects that as well. It's either, you know, you're pressing it and you're going all the way, or you're not. However, the option is there if for some reason there's some conflicts. You can set a minimum radius to be 0 or somewhere around 0, and then the maximum to be higher than that or somewhere in between. And that would make it to where the left stick does have that pressure sensitive kind of gradual movement, just like these values for the right stick do. So the targeting reticule, its minimum radius is 0, because even if you press it a little tiny bit, I want it to actually move only a little tiny bit. And then the max radius is just how far in pixels the radius of that circle that the targeting reticule moves in is. And remember, all of these values already scale based on this base resolution. So if yours is larger, these values go larger. If your desktop or if your window is smaller, these values get smaller. So next up is the offset values for things. So the center of the screen for Diablo isn't actually the exact center. It's a little bit lower. So I have this value here so that you can actually change that. So for Diablo, I've set it to -60. That seems to be about where your character's feet are. And this value is actually where the loot command spams. It's at 0, -60. So that's what this value is for, or that's what it's used for. Then next we have the offset for the movement stick, or the left stick by default. And this one, I put it a little bit higher than the center that I've set, you know, previously at -60. And the reason for that was I was having some difficulty actually moving up and keeping like a good circle around the character's feet. So the actual like center of movement is a little bit higher than where the player's feet kind of sit. So that's what I've set for these two values. Next is the targeting centers, offset X and Y. This one, I didn't feel that there was any need to offset anything. So it's just exactly where I've set the center here at -60. So these values are additive. So the targeting centers offset X and Y are 0, which means that the net value for this is going to be 0, -60, because these are additive. Next up, I have the sensitivity values for cursor mode, and then the X and Y sensitivity values for free target mode. They start off at 1.0, and just so that you're aware, the speed at which cursor mode and free target mode move is scaled based on your desktop resolution. So the hope is that you won't have to edit these, but if you do need to edit them, I have provided them just in case. And then finally, just like you can enable cursor mode or free target mode at the start of the program, you can also swap the sticks at the start of the program if you need to. That way, if you're a person who wants to have the left stick always do targeting reticule stuff, then you are free to do so at the start of the program. You don't have to press any buttons. Alright, so that's analog stick done. So now let's move on to inventory. This one's really short. So just like we saw with the inventory grid, when that mode's enabled, the mouse moves on a grid. Now, I did not put all of those values into the INI. It's super lengthy. I may do so if people really need that stuff in this INI. Instead, it's hard-coded. But even though it's hard-coded, I have allowed for some custom scaling. Just like the analog stick scales based on a base resolution, this one has an internal base resolution of 1920 by 1080. So if you have a larger monitor, it will automatically try to scale to that. But it'll only work when it's, of 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So this custom scaling is here just in case you have an odd aspect ratio monitor. You can use these two values to actually help you to scale that better. Next, we have the hold to move. As you saw when I was demonstrating the inventory grid, you can press and hold the D-pad to go ahead and move the cursor faster, which is kind of like, I would say, expected behavior, right? That's why it's on by default. But if you want to, you can set this to false, and instead pressing and holding the D-pad will use the bound key for the press action instead. So in the case of the defaults, if I turned this off, then D-pad up, instead of, when I press and hold it, instead of moving the cursor up on the grid rapidly, it would press skills for me. If I press and held left, it would open the follower menu, etc., etc. Again, it's just an option that's there in case it's useful to someone. I like being able to press and hold the D-pad to move the cursor faster, so that's why that's the default. Next, we have the hold delay for the inventory, and what this does is if you set this value lower, it'll move the cursor faster when you're pressing and holding. Same thing for when you press and hold in any direction. This is just the time in milliseconds between moving the mouse again while you're holding. So this setting this to lower values moves it faster while you're pressing and holding. And then finally we have remember position. What this does is whenever you close the inventory, should the script remember where it left off. Now I have it set to false by default because it was getting kind of aggravating to like open up the menu, check out an item on the far right, and then close it, and then I pick up another item and I open up the menu and I'm like all the way to the far right, and I can't see where the new items are and all this. So I set it to false, which means it'll always start off at the top left grid position. But if you set it to true, then every time you open and close the inventory, it'll always pick up exactly where it left off. So if you were on your head slot and you close it and you reopen it, you'll be on your head slot again. Alright, so the last tab, it's a long tab, but there's not a huge amount to actually go over. So this is all of the settings for the image overlay. The first setting is pretty obvious, enable or disable. If you don't actually want to deal with it, you don't like the image overlay, you can go ahead and disable it if you really want to. I obviously like it, so I want to keep it on. And I have some other ideas for it as well. It's going to get better and better as I update it. And just like the inventory and the analog stick, these are all based on 1920 by 1080 resolution. Just a quick aside, funnily enough, I actually am not using a 1920 by 1080 monitor. That's just a really good base resolution, so that's why these are all set to this. My monitor is actually larger than that. But anyway. Next we have the image scale. This is the actual scale of the icons themselves. Since I'm using very large icons, I need them to be a lot smaller. As you can see, only about like 20% of their actual size. So that's what I've set that for the scale. Next I have this image set and the image set size that I'm using. These are the actual folder paths, and this is actually a good time for me to actually kind of scoot over here. So that's taking it from auto hotkey, images, and then it picks the folder path from here. So this one's Xbox, and then it goes either hold or press, which was the filled in one is hold, the not filled in one was the press. And then it picks a size, either 64 or 128. Now, you can, of course, find your own icons, and you can make sure to name them the same things that they are here, and it can pick them up from there. These are just the default that I've provided for you. As you can see, I am working on getting the PS4 and the Nintendo Switch icons. It's just kind of a tedious process for me to rename all the icons and everything, so I haven't quite gotten to that yet. But I can assure you, it's a very simple process. It's just kind of tedious to rename, that's why I haven't done it. But that's what these values are asking for, is just Xbox and then what size, either 64 or 128. So next we have the show battery status, and that was the little green battery status here at the top left that was showing. So it's using X inputs values for this, so there's actually only 4 different battery states, either full, medium, low, or empty. Those are the only 4 battery statuses that I can actually get from the program. So that's the ones that I use, and they look like this: high, medium, low, and then empty. You can turn it off here if you'd rather not see that. It also only, from what I can see, works with the Xbox controllers. I can't seem to get it to work with DS4 Windows. So unfortunate, but that's a limitation of X input. Alright, and then next we have the actual settings for the image overlay. So there's 4 settings per image. So I'm just going to go over the first image, and then you can figure out that the rest do the same thing, just for the different images. So the first setting for each image is the key binding that it's attached to. So this one is attached to the Q key. Now that's my default skill 1. So the image that it displays is whatever controller button I have bound to Q. The reason why I set it up this way is because your key bindings in game will most likely never change, because you want to keep them the same for when you swap between controller and keyboard. But what's bound on the controller could change at any time as you're kind of getting acclimated to things. So this kind of future proofs it for yourself to where, you know, this will always be, for me, Q, because I'm never going to update my key bindings in Diablo 3. But I can still update all of my key bindings on my controller, and this image will always display whatever is bound to Q. Next is just the position on the screen. Remember that they're scaled based on a 1920 by 1080 resolution. So that's what these values are based on. This is pretty much at the bottom of the screen, 1070 on the Y. It's like way down here. And then 660, that's my skill 1, so it's about right here. And then finally, the last setting is the background. You can leave it blank to have it just be a transparent background if you want. But all of these images are completely transparent, so it's kind of hard to see. The reason why I have this value here and I didn't just fill in all of these buttons with like a black background is because I understood that there were probably going to be games that didn't use like a black background for some of the actual like images, and so I kind of left it open to you, like, do you want to match the background of the UI of the game for the image overlay, or do you want to set it black, or however, or you may get a completely different set of icons, and so a white background may be better. Again, a lot of these settings that I have here are here for convenience. If you ever decide to change them, they're not locked within the code. You can change them to whatever you want. So with that, we've gone through all of our profile INI settings. So let's say that we've set all of our stuff. We're all good to go. We're ready to move on. What we want to do is hit set profile. That will make sure that this particular INI is the one that's set in our config. And if you want to know where this is stored, you can actually see the path in the title of this window here. So that's starting from the root, and we go to settings, and then we go to profiles, Diablo3.ini. I'm going to actually open this. It is exactly as is written here. All this config program does is just read this line for line. It's not actually hard coded. These comments are in the INI itself, and it just reads them and prints them out all nice and pretty. So you can edit these manually if you'd like to. You don't have to use the config program. It's just for convenience. Just want to throw that out there. So we've set our profile. I want to quickly show you how to open up the actual config itself for the script. So we'll go back to the root. That's located in AutoHotkey config.ini, but if you want to open it up quickly in the configuration program, there's actually a button at the bottom here. So we'll open up config, and we can see that's in AutoHotkey config.ini. So this is some of the calibration settings, and that's kind of why I've set this as like its own INI, and this is set up this way because it's going to be global throughout probably all applications that you use. The very first setting, because I'll go over these kind of quickly, is just the calibration that I have for the controller, and actually, just for completeness sake, I'll actually set this to true. I'll save this with my handy dandy save button. INI saved, and then I will launch it, and I will show you how to go through calibration. So to begin, we need to determine the max range that your analog sticks are able to reach. Basically what we want to do is move our left stick up all the way in a circle, and then while still holding it in that circle, and let me actually turn on my little controller overlay, we want to press the button, and then we'll do the same thing with the right stick. So let me show it in action here. So we want to press our left stick all the way up to the top, and then we want to spin it around in a circle, And then we want to press a button, any button, while still holding it out like that. Then we'll let go. And now we'll do the same, but for the right stick. So we'll move it all the way up, spin it around in a circle, and then we'll press any button. Okay, so now we've done that. The next part that we want to do is find out the dead zones. So we're just gonna kind of, throw our sticks in a circle randomly and then leave them at rest. So we'll hit OK. So we'll go ahead and do that. Do it one time, do it 2 times, and then finally do it the 3rd time. And that's pretty much it. So I haven't hit OK yet, so these values haven't changed. What the config helps you do is set the dead zone and also the max range kind of dead zone. So we will hit OK. Go ahead and close the program. And if I want to see what those values change to, probably not much deviation. But that's what the calibration is for, is just setting the 2 dead zones. You can edit these manually if you know what you're doing. But I've found that the calibration program does a pretty good job of estimating what your dead zone is and what your max dead zone is. Alright, so the next part is the other tab here. This tab is where the profile path is and where the key binding path is, and then the target FPS. So I'm using a 144 Hertz monitor. So I've obviously set my target FPS to be 144, but by default I set it to 60, since that's what most people's monitors probably are. You can edit these values manually, but the configuration program that we're running right now does this kind of stuff with the profile and the key bindings. It does that for you. Whenever you press these buttons, it sets these values. Keep in mind that they're all relative from the actual script. So this is where the script is in the root folder auto hotkey. So in order to get to settings, we need to go up 1, settings, profiles, Diablo, right? So these are all relative paths. Keep that in mind. Alright, so now let's go over the final thing here. So you can see, I just want to mention that these are kind of organized. Like this one says Diablo 3, then there's a slash. That's because these key bindings are actually in a folder. So if we go to the actual path itself, we can see key bindings, and then we can see I have a folder for Diablo where I have my default key bindings, Demon Hunter, and Necromancer. You can put as many folders or as few folders as you like, and they'll all load in this little neat drop down. So let's go ahead and pick my Demon Hunter key bindings, and that'll load up. There's only one tab for key bindings, thankfully. If you've used the previous version, you'll know that this was coupled with the profile INI, but I've separated them in this version because I found that a lot of the time all of these settings in the profile INI are specific to a game, and then all of these key binding INI settings are specific to a character. So it's very useful to separate them so that you could set one up all the way for a game, and then you could just tweak a couple of key bindings here for a specific character. So let's get into the key bindings. So the basic format for all of these keys is going to be the modifier, and then a plus symbol, and then the button to press, and then a comma, and then the modifier when held, and then a plus, and then the key when held. So for instance, for left trigger, that one presses shift, that's the modifier, and it also presses left mouse button, that's what L button is. All of these keys can be found at this website, at this nice little hyperlink here. Click on that, that'll go to the auto hotkey documentation that will tell you what all these keys are. Very quickly though, L button is left mouse button, R button, right mouse, M button is middle mouse button, numpad and then a number is for the numpad keys, so on and so forth. You can check them out at this link here. So another example here, we have left bumper. Remember that did skill 1 when pressed and held, and skill 2 when pressed. So we have W, for which for me is skill 2 when pressed, and then a comma, and then Q, which is for me skill 1 when held. And I won't go over all of them because I've already gone over, what each of the buttons do. But you can see here these special key bindings like cursor mode and loot, free target, swap sticks. These work exactly like regular keys as far as the syntax goes. So you can see here for D-pad right, 5 opens up the map overlay for me, and numpad 4 opens up the world map. So for this one, it's overlay on press, comma, world map plus cursor mode at the same time. It does both of these at the same time. So you can set up things like I did with the inventory as well, where it presses a key and it does a special action all in one key binding. Next we have the force move setting. For Diablo, it's going to be space, but this is whatever you want to be pressed whenever you're moving the left stick, whether it's space or left click or something similar. That's where this actually goes. Next we have the targeted actions. So what this is going to do is anything put into this list is going to be considered a targeted action, meaning that it must move the mouse over to the targeting reticule, use the skill, and then when you let go, move the mouse back to where it was. So the only buttons that I need that to happen for on my Demon Hunter is my left mouse button plus shift and my right mouse button, and that is left trigger and right trigger. Those are the only skills that I need to be targeted. The rest can just be used however, wherever. They don't need a target. Next, though, we have the movement actions, and I kind of went over that a little bit already. What these are for is things like the Demon Hunter Vault that you saw, and like Barbarian Whirlwind, where they don't need to move the mouse to the targeting reticule, but rather they need to move the mouse to wherever the left stick is positioned, if it isn't already, and fire off the skill there so that you can use them to move in that direction rather than targeting them at a specific location. So that pretty much covers all of the different settings, and just like the profile INI, when you're ready to set it, you just hit set key binding, and you'll also probably want to save it as well. Just a couple of other things going on with the program. Just want to explain the other buttons. Launch obviously launches the program. Open INI will actually open up the file explorer, and you can pick a very specific INI if you want to open it, and it will open it there. You won't be able to use either of these two buttons, but you can edit and save that INI. So it is useful for those purposes if you want to use this as just an INI editor rather than for its intended purposes. That's kind of what that button is there for. Open config, I've already seen that opens up the script config INI. New INI will create a new file with whatever you happen to name it. So I'll hit OK, and it will load up the default values whenever that it does that. So now you can see I have this very strangely named INI here, and it has all the default values for its settings, right? Default will reset an INI back to the default if you made mistakes. So if I change this value to something else, and then I hit default and I say yes, then we will see that this vibration duration will be set back to 125 for me. So that's basically what all of those do. Really, there's not anything else that I can really think to go over. I've already went over the file structure. We've already gone over the config program. I showed a little bit of the end game stuff. So yeah, basically that is the end of the video here. Just like always, if you're feeling incredibly generous and you want to support development of this program, I'm going to go ahead and leave my PayPal donation link in the description. But other than that, basically, thanks for watching all the way through this video. I have no idea how long it was. I do know that I've been talking for a very, very long time. My throat's kind of hurting. It's kind of itching, you know. I haven't been drinking water. Probably should have prepared, had some water, but I didn't. But yeah, thanks for watching through all this. If you have any suggestions for the program or any bugs that you find, make sure to drop those down in the comments. If you're a fellow programmer and you know a little bit about coding and you want to drop an issue on the GitHub project, you can go ahead and do that there. I will accept pull requests if they're, you know, relevant. Just be aware that unfortunately I have not had time to actually comment any of the code that I have on GitHub. So whatever brave soul decides to open up those .ahk files and sift through that stuff, you know, more power to you. But yeah, that's basically going to do it for me. If I post any more updates, like I said, they will be on the GitHub release page. So check back there and on this YouTube channel, because I will be putting up another video just saying like, hey, you know, new release or whatever. So thanks again. Peace out.